The Middle Ages have been stamped as an unlucky time to be born, and popular consensus is that people were poor, the food was dull, and everything was dirty, and the vast majority of the population was dropping like flies. What we don't hear about is that people created some of the most spectacularly bizarre and hilarious trends in human history. Let's take some time to embrace the medieval period and all of its crazy eccentricities. Here's 5 bizarre medieval trends. Many people of medieval Europe joined together at the beginning of January to celebrate the Feast of Fools. This event, like most Christian festivals, was inspired by a pagan festival and turned the status quo on its head. The highest respected officials swapped with the lowest serving maids and became masters. A king of misrule was crowned. Although originally intended to be confined only to the hallowed halls of the churches, the common people took it upon themselves to celebrate. There were parades, comic performances, costume, cross-dressing, rowdy songs, and of course, excessive drinking. Not entirely related, but equally as difficult to comprehend, was the Festival of the Ass, where a young girl carrying a child would ride a donkey into a church, and throughout the service the congregation replaced Amen with Yeehaw. Considering the celebration was held in a super strict Christian medieval Europe, it's impressive it survived for so long. However, over time the rules were tightened, certain acts forbidden, and the final nail in the coffin of fun came with the Protestant Reform, which condemned all enjoyable excess. Life in medieval times could be tough, and this didn't just apply to humans. Just like their two-legged owners, all manner of animals, from livestock to insects, were put on trial if suspected of breaking the law. There are records of at least 85 animal trials that took place during the medieval ages, and the tales vary from tragic to the absurd, as described in the book of The Prosecution and Capital Punishment of Animals by E.P. Evans. By far the most serial offenders were pigs, accused and convicted of chewing off body parts and even eating children. Most were found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging or being burned at the stake. In 1386, a convicted pig was dressed in a waistcoat, gloves, drawers, and a human mask for its execution. It wasn't just pigs that felt the sting of the law, though. In 1474, a court found a rooster guilty of the unnatural crime of laying an egg. Unwanted rats often found themselves on the receiving end of a strongly worded letter asking them to leave the premises. And curiously enough, there was a trial of dolphins in the Marshallese in 1596. However, not all trials ended in brutality. One donkey found herself the victim of unwanted sexual advances, was proclaimed innocent after a strong recommendation from a convent's prior declaring her to be a virtuous and well-behaved animal. Clothes were hugely important to the medieval elite, as it was the way of displaying their wealth and overall superiority over the poor. Because of this, various unusual fashion trends swept through Europe, such as long pointed shoes for men. The longer the shoes, the greater the wealth of the wearer, hence the social rank. Some of the shoes were so long they had to be reinforced with whalebone. In the late 14th century, men were pretty keen to show off their bodies in a saucy and revealing way. They would wear dangerously short tunics with tights. This trend was followed by a codpiece, which is a pouch attached to the front of men's trousers, shaped and padded to emphasize their masculinity. Much of what people assume about medieval upper-class marriage is true. It was rarely for love, but rather for political and social gain. And women, as in most aspects of medieval life, had no say. In fact, men and women were judged ready for marriage as soon as their bodies reached puberty, as young as 12 for girls and 14 for boys. Marriage ceremony as we know it today was very different. For a start, there wasn't a formal ceremony until much later, and couples didn't need permission to marry. They could do it in a matter of moments, just by uttering consent, which led to marriages in the streets, down the pubs, or even in bed. This meant it became rather hard to prove people were actually married. So in the 12th century, it was declared a holy sacrament that must be observed by God. And it wasn't just the marriage that had to be observed. The consummation, especially among upper-class newlyweds, was far from a private event. It wasn't unusual for the bride to be carried to the bed by her family. The act of bedding was not regarded as an intimate moment, but rather an act of investment in the union. and one that warranted being observed by witnesses. Some couples had their blushes spared by the luxury of a bed curtain, but this was not the case for everyone, and observers would instead wait around the room for the act to be completed. Couples in medieval Germany didn't waste time when it came to solving their disputes. Rather than just arguing like any normal couple, they took it to the ring. Trial by single combat was a popular way to solve disagreements, and when man and wife were fighting, there were bizarre restrictions. For example, to even the field, the man had to fight from inside a hole with one arm tied behind his back. The woman was free to move around and was armed with a sack filled with rocks. The man had 3 clubs at his disposal. If he touched the side of the hole during the combat, he would forfeit one of his clubs. Whoever lost the battle would be put to death.